Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Coffee with Cory. I'm your host, Cory Smith, here to discuss some NC State football. Well, really, the national football scene as well. Just obviously, the news coming down last week, the NCAA tournament expanding to 76 teams, ACC meetings currently taking place right now, and all the discussion is about clearly the revenue and ways that the ACC can continue to drive up revenue and ways that they can continue to expand and make their footprint that much bigger. Well, one of the ways to do that is potentially having a college football playoff that expands to maybe 16 teams, maybe 18 teams, but apparently the ACC, and now we know from NC State and hearing Dave Doran in an interview with WREL talk about the fact that they may be looking to expand to 24 teams. What that would mean for NC State clearly is a much more significant piece of the pie. NC State has missed out on the college football playoff, obviously, since the time it started. But one of the things that they have done throughout this is finish inside of the top, 18, top 24, multiple times when it comes to the college football playoff rankings. Actually, they finished 18th back in, or trying to go back here. Here we go. All right, so 15th was the final, or 24th was the final ranking back in 2017. 14th was the highest they reached in 2018. Probably could have finished better if you didn't lose to Wake Forest and some others that year and fall off the face of the earth at the end of the season. But back in 2020, which would have been interesting in general, but they finished 23rd overall. 2021 finished 18th overall. 2022 they finished 23rd overall, and then 2023 they finished 18th overall. So each and every single one of those seasons, if you had a 24-team playoff, NC State would have been in the playoff. Now, you can say whether or not you think that means as much as it does to make it to a 12-team playoff, whatever. That's fine. It doesn't mean as much, obviously, but what it does do is give more teams a chance to compete and try to get to the top of the mountain. Now, obviously, if you're in NC State, you're probably not thinking about a national championship if you get in. But can you win a game getting into the college football playoff? Can you drive up revenue for your team to continue getting better as a program? Can you drive up revenue for the ACC to try to make the ACC better? Yes, all of those things potentially would have been on the table. I'm just going to go back, that you look at it last year. James Madison would have been in as the number 24 overall seed and played against Alabama. That's probably not, a matchup for NC State. If you're going to go on the road and play at Alabama, that probably would have not worked out as well. But if you go back to, NC State finishing, 18th in both 2023 and 2021, you do that last year and you go on the road as the number 18 seed to Utah. That doesn't seem as big of a deal. Now, clearly going, I'm sorry to Mark Armstrong. I'm not trying to put down Utah here, but that seems like a much more feasible matchup. You go on the road, you face that type of team. Say you move up to a number 17, you face a USC. Say you fall to number 19, as Virginia would have been last year, and face number 14 Vanderbilt on the road. So, clearly, these are all hypotheticals based on last year. But, if you go back to the 2021 season, the number 15 seed that season would have been Iowa. If you're NC State and you're the number 18 overall seed, you're going on the road to Iowa. That's a decent matchup. That's one that you feel like, all right, you have a chance there. Or, say you fall to number 19 and you face number 14 Oregon. All of those matchups seem like, hey, those are at least winnable matchups for those teams. I mean, I go back to the 2021 team, Devin Leary, Bam Knight, Emeka Emezi, Drake Thomas, all those guys still in the NFL. I think they had lost Peyton Wilson earlier on that season, but those are all, guys on that team that could have helped to elevate you and get you to that point to be able to compete and get to, at least the next round. We're not talking about getting to, playing in the national championship game or anything along those lines, but winning a game, the notoriety that would bring with it, as opposed to playing, and I believe it was, you're playing in not a meaningless game that season, but you didn't end up playing in, the best overall game back in 2021. I think 2023 was a different scenario where you ended up playing in the Pop-Tarts Bowl with Brennan Armstrong and, Casey Concepcion leading the way. That would have been a slightly different scenario. But what this means is you give yourself a seat at the table at the very least. And I don't think this is something where, I talked about the NCAA tournament, expanding to 76 teams last week and said it kind of devalues the regular season. I think this actually ups the value of the regular season for a lot of teams across the board. And I think it makes a lot more games more marketable. And I know ESPN has pushed back against the notion of doing this, and with good reason. They want to continue to have something for people to go to when it comes to bowl games, and they have a lot of stake in the bowl game. So clearly, they still want that, and they also still want to have value in the top, the teams competing for the top 12 at the very top of their lineups on Saturdays. But this makes a lot more games marketable. Like if there's more teams that have a chance to get inside of the college football playoff, and if you're NC State, I mean, the thing is, like, you go back to that 2021 season, as much as they finish strong and finish 18th overall, you lose a couple early games, you fall outside of the rankings, and it's like, all right, man, what is there to compete for? What is there to worry about now at this point? But if you have that top 24 to try to get into, if you have that, all right, well, we have a chance to compete for, a home playoff spot compared to playing on the road at Iowa or playing on the road at Oregon or something along those lines, it makes those games at the end of the season that much more marketable, but it also makes them much more meaningful for a team like NC State, for teams, on the cusp of this thing. Like I'm still going back, obviously, Wake Forest is a team that finished ahead of NC State back in 2021. You go back to this past season and, teams that were just on the cusp, like Iowa, Georgia Tech, Houston, Tulane, all of those teams. Now, granted, Tulane ended up making it in because of the way that it worked out last season, but all of those teams would have had something to play for at the end of the season, along with just trying to get to the college football playoff. Virginia would have been the number 19 seed this past year. Yes, they ended up losing in the ACC title game, but there wouldn't have been as much pressure on you. That you have a chance to get in because you're one of the top, at that time going into it, one of the top 12 teams and trying to compete to get to the college football playoff at the time. Now you're looking at it going, all right, we have a shot to get in. Now let's go win the ACC championship game and solidify ourselves as potentially a home team as opposed to playing on the road, which, I'm looking at the CBS Sports projections from last year. Virginia would have got in and went on the road to play Vanderbilt. So, like, again, these are all hypotheticals, and yes, I know we're talking a lot about something that still hasn't gone through yet, but I'm just trying to give you guys a reason for the benefits of what it might mean for NC State, because you then have a shot, on an every other year basis. You build towards something. Like, you look at this upcoming season. I think this team has a chance to be a top 25 team by the end of the season if they play their cards right, if they go through the schedule the way that they should. And I'm not like, look, I know people are going to be like, well, what are you talking about? I mean, we'll talk about, the actual projections later on in the season, but I do think if this team wins at UVA, I mean, it technically will be an at UVA game, but it'll be in Rio, and wins, at Vanderbilt early on in the season, you start off 4-0 in non-conference, or, technically, I guess it would be 3-1 through the first 4 games, with one of those being a conference game, or 4-0. Like, you put yourself in a really good position because the rest of the schedule is not that difficult. But if you want to get to the actual promised land, like if you want to get to the top 12, right now you probably have to either win the ACC or get yourself double-digit wins and just miss out on the ACC championship game because of losing a game in conference play, but you played well enough during the non-conference to get yourself inside of the college football playoff. Like, that's the only scenario right now. But there would be multiple scenarios if it opened up to an 18-team or a 24-team playoff, 18-team playoff for NC State. Again, you would have gotten in twice over the last decade for NC State, going back to 2017 or going back to twice in the last 5 years for NC State, because of the fact that in 2021 you finished 18th overall, in 2023 you finished 18th overall. Those teams would have gotten to a college football playoff. How much different would players look at that too? Do players opt out if you have a shot to continue to advance? How different would those teams look if you didn't have, you go back to the 2021 team, if you didn't have multiple guys sitting out for that game, 2023, if you didn't have some of your defensive stars sitting out for that game, how much different would those games look? I know a lot of people like to fall back on, Dave Jordan doesn't get it done in the postseason outside of this past season against Memphis, but you do know that if those players potentially play in those games, how much different it would look for NC State late game scenarios, and how much more emphasis it would be put on trying to advance, as opposed to, all right, this is a luxury that we're at a bowl game. Let's just go out and try to win the game and not put as much emphasis on actually winning it and trying to advance. So look, I know some people are going to push back on it, and it sounds stupid. It sounds like, oh, you're devaluing it. But I really think from an overall standpoint, having a 24-team playoff would give a lot more teams chances late in the season, but also, would give some underdogs, some teams that are missing out on the playoff despite being very good teams and having a chance to compete, a chance to just at least get there and get to that point. So we'll see what ultimately, all these, the SEC, the Big Ten, how they want to kind of do this. But it does sound like the ACC is pushing for it. I think the Big 12 is pushing for it. Maybe we'll see the Big Ten and the SEC jump on board. And then if that becomes the case, how much more does the NCAA push back against ESPN and try to make something more happen for more teams to get in there? And maybe, yes, I know it devalues what bowl season would ultimately be, but I do think this has a chance to really make the regionality of college football that much better, but also the value of the late season games to try to compete to get to this point that much more significant, even for teams with 2 or 3 losses to try to get in. Yes, a 3-loss team in the ACC could get in, but that could still be a very good team that just lost to some really good teams early on in the season and still plays themselves back into the mix late, whereas you absolutely cannot do that right now with the way college football actually works. So thank you to everybody for listening. We will have much more on this. I'm sure we'll talk to people over the summer as this continues to kind of progress, and we'll see ultimately what the NCAA, ESPN, and everybody else ultimately decides. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We will talk to you again soon.